morning. Welcome to the Los Angeles World Affairs Council and Town Hall. I'm Kim McCleary, President and CEO, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you today. It is now my very great pleasure to introduce today's program, Daughters of Smoke and Fire, a window into the Kurdish people's everyday struggle, with Ava Homa, novelist, journalist, and activist, and our moderator, Maryam Zar, who is also a Los Angeles World Affairs Town Hall board member and founder of WomenFound. Maryam, we are so appreciative of you moderating another program with us. This is going to be a fabulous discussion. Let me turn this over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you for welcoming me again. It's absolutely a pleasure to moderate any event for the LA World Affairs Council, but especially today with Ava. It is truly my pleasure to be here with her today. As I'm sure we all know, and if we've forgotten, let me remind you all that we're still in the month of March. This is the month where we celebrate women all across the world. We celebrate their achievements, and we also celebrate their challenges and some of the issues they face uniquely around the world. And this is actually a great book that brings up a lot of issues, including gender issues and you know, the added baggage that I think women face in parts of the world where we easily dismiss. We call it culture, but it really isn't, and it has an impact on singular lives. And this book really brought that out for us, in addition to some geopolitical narratives that have been going on for generations that, again, I think we, as a global population, think, well, this is the way it is. And this book is a personal story about how it isn't just the way it is, and we should be questioning everything. So I want to welcome Ava. Ava Homa is a writer and a journalist and an activist. The book we're going to discuss today, which is called Daughters of Smoke and Fire, is her debut novel. She is the first Kurdish woman to write a book in English, a novel in English. So congratulations, Ava. The book has been chosen to be, Ava, correct me, tell me the book, you just wrote it to me this morning, so I don't have it committed to memory, but your book was listed as one of the best of 2020 by what organizations?
So hi, Maryam. Thanks for that introduction.
You're welcome. I'll continue to introduce you, but just remind us.
So in England, Independent, in Canada, Globe and Mail, and in the US, Wall Street Journal, Book Browse, and several other places.
Well, congratulations, because it really is a wonderful book. Homa also delivers speeches on writings and resistance, on human rights, on gender equality, on Kurdish affairs, media literacy, and other topics. She has a master's degree in creative writing from the University of Windsor in Canada. She has another master's in English language and literature from Tehran, and a diploma in editing from Toronto. So a global woman, if we've ever had one with us. Homa, Ava, welcome to the program. I thought I would begin by sharing with everyone my own impression of your book. I read quite a bit, and this one really left a mark on me. When I first reached out to Ava, everyone, I told her how thrilled I was to be moderating this talk, and I told her that this book should be a must-read for every teacher and every global leader around the world. It's a lesson in the impact of deep-rooted bias and stale global policies that have forever upended peace. Then I started to read some reviews, and I realized that everyone thought the same thing. People who thought they knew plenty around the world about geopolitics would read this book and understand that this is the story of a personal impact in a life and in a family. One of the reviewers says, this is an unforgettable book. One way to put it would be, wow. She says, I learned so much about the devastating history of the Kurdish people. Another says, this story inspired me to become more aware about Kurds in Iran and human rights issues. So this book really does teach us to look again at some of the issues that we've long forgotten. So I want to posit for our discussion today that, Ava, you're very much of a global teacher and an ambassador for the story of your people. This compelling and excruciatingly difficult yet softly written book is a telling of a deeply personal story through the lens of an entire people with global impact. Today, as we look across the globe at various movements that compel us to ask why, we can look at your book, this story, and help us parse through the very difficult patterns of abject unfairness and try to envision a world where this kind of gratuitous pain isn't visited upon an entire people. simply because of their ethnicity or their cultural identity or the god they worship or the color of their skin or the shape of their eyes. This novel is told through a painful multi-sectional lens of gender, political disposition, cultural identity, and more. It's hard to know where to begin, Ava, but let's try. I want to start around halfway through, about midway through the book, after the reader has already lived and died with your character through countless stories of survival and death. We've learned that the Kurdish people are tested as a matter of course. We've understood that children come to realize this very early on. Your character has this turning point around the middle of the book where she arguably goes from being a girl, right, lost in the history of her family, to this motivated woman who ends up really gaining the respect of all the people that she sort of wondered about her whole life. She has a near fatal accident at this moment, and she ends up in the hospital where her brother, the light of her life at that moment, comes to visit her. And he's also growing into an activist. He gives her a book. It turns out to be his diary. And he says to her, fill up the rest of the empty pages with your truth. And so she says it's very difficult for her, but finally she says, I write so my brother and I understand how much our destiny was shaped before eggs and sperm united to make us. Because if I don't tell our story, how can I understand why Chia is following in Baba's footsteps? How can I understand that the prison guards who tortured Baba torment me too? What it means to belong to a stateless people so crushed under tyranny that self-sabotage has become routine. How can I ever be free if I don't fight my faceless prison guards? So I want you to talk about that moment, because I wonder if that in some way reflected your own moment in life when you knew that you had to write to tell the story of your people.
Well, hi everyone. Thank you so much, Maryam, for that kind introduction. I would like to thank the LA World Affairs for holding this event and inviting me, making me part of their vibrant programs. And thanks to you for joining us and listening to us and watching this event today. Maryam, thank you for that humbling introduction. In terms of telling your story and telling your truth and the impact it leaves in the world, and where I learned the story of my own people, I just think I grew up completely assimilated. I grew up not really actually learning anything about Kurdish history or language or culture other than what I could see firsthand at home, but everything outside of the home, starting from the first grade where a new language is beaten into you, to textbooks that deny your existence as an independent group, to media, to everything, to parents who think they're protecting you and sheltering you, but not sharing the history. I grew up very unaware and assimilated. It was through migration, and after living in Canada, when I first met some of great authors who had written about Kurds, like Jonathan Randall and Kevin McKiernan, and also I got to meet a lot of Kurds from different parts of the world, from other countries, where I realized that, oh my God, I do not know anything. And that's when I picked up the history books and tried to educate myself, which was really, really painful on two levels. On one level, that, oh my God, how much a group of people suffer and go through genocide and are targeted for extinction only because of the way human world has been manufactured. And also by how disconnected I had been from my own reality. But things clicked when I was reading those books and watching those movies, like Good Kurds, Bad Kurds, or after such knowledge, what forgiveness. Then that's when I realized, oh, so this is why my father, my grandfather, my mother were the way they were. They were a product of this long history. And so I also, that was one thing. The other thing is, I feel like I learned a lot about the rest of the world through reading their literature, through reading their stories. And that helped me expand my heart and allow more people into my heart, more than my immediate family. It helped me know more people, care for a larger group of people. And I realized that if we do that, if we share our stories, if we read each other, we will be moving toward creating a better world for everyone. And so I decided to tell the Kurds story because it was part of my lived experience and it was part of my research. And in doing that, I was trying to create this dialogue for more engagement with more people from across the world. But I wanted to create characters who aren't as ignorant as I was. I wanted to have characters who are more aware of their realities, of how geopolitics shape who they are and what they experience in life. And that's what this passage was rooted in.
I have a sense that your book did exactly that for readers. So to the extent that you had that moment in life where you thought, if I learn more about the circumstances of other people, I can let more people into my heart and I can care. And to ultimately recognize that the story of struggle, the struggles of various people around the world is rooted in the same set of biases. I feel like reading your book does the same thing. It's beyond reading history or understanding that there is a stateless people called the Kurds. Reading your book really brings home a story, and it's amazing that this is a story that you were able to sense in this beautiful way that you've written it without having experienced it, but through research and learning about other people's circumstances. It's really a compelling book, everyone. It's softly written, but it's a whole lot to unpack. So I recommend it for all people. Given the fact that this is Women's Awareness Month, I want to take you over to the women's angle of your novel. There is a lot of bias that you unpack in your book, but one of the constant underlying themes is the added pressure that Layla, your heroine, has because she's a girl. The expectations that not just her society, but even her family have of her, and how that bumps up against some of her own ambitions. So you are, as we said, the first Kurdish woman who's written a novel in English. You're an accomplished writer, an activist, an educator. You clearly do not see your gender as a basis for limits. But your book unmistakably conveys the downward pressure on girls and maddeningly portrays the various ways that women are viewed primarily as a gender rather than a whole person. As I read the book, I was almost equally devastated by the gender realities women faced as I was about the geopolitical tragedies in the narrative. What is it like for a Kurdish woman who wants to push against cultural expectations that are rooted in gender boundaries? And as you do your research, is it a cultural tradition that you can attribute to being Kurd, or do you think it's a product of living under scrutiny in some of these conservative Muslim societies?
Right. So I think it's kind of both. Like if you look at Kurdish history, you will see examples of Kurdish women having been rulers and governors during, especially under the Ottoman Empire, when this was unheard of in their neighboring, among their neighboring communities. So a lot of Western travelers have noted that it was common and accepted for a lot of Kurdish men to obey Kurdish women. We have had examples of really powerful women throughout history, like Adala Khatun, who was this woman from my city, Sanandaj, from Ardalan family, who when married an Iraqi Kurd, Osman Pasha, she created a garden and she initiated her own court of justice. So for the rest of her life, people would go to her as a judge and bring her issues to her to help resolve. We have Hafsa Khatun in 1923, who said every woman has to be educated. Literacy is mandatory for all women. And even up to like 1945, when we had the Mahabat Republic, or the first Kurdish Republic in history, where of the 11 speakers that day, 3 of them were women, and all of them emphasized the importance of having women engage in economy and politics, society, and all of that. So it was important for me. Well, I believe that the idea of equality, any sort of equality, including gender equality, unlike what a group of people like to present, is not a Western product. It's actually innate in us. As much as biases and ignorances are innate for us, within us, a desire for justice and equality is also in us. And so when you look at Kurdish history, you will see a lot of examples of strong, powerful women, and a lot of also men who have advocated for gender equality. But that's just one side of the story, right? The other side of the story is that the fact is Kurdish women are and have been victims of FGM and honor killing and this and that. So then the question you ask is the million-dollar question. Where do these come from? Like, how can you have both? How can you have such contradictions within a culture? And a culture is affected by a lot of things, obviously, more than anything by people in power who make decisions and they decide that equality is not exactly beneficial. And in fact, it's division that helps them rule. So to get back to your question, patriarchy is part of the human culture. It's not just really a Kurdish culture. But today, when you look at Kurdish women, again, you see a spectrum of people. You see women who are victims of self-immolation because they don't really find another way to deal with life. And at the same time, you have women in Rojava who not only have their own independent militia and are fighting ISIS, defeated ISIS, they're also actively working against biases within their own community. They didn't just defeat ISIS, they also dismantled polygamy, child marriage, and things like that. So when you look at Kurdish women are fighting two battles at the same time. One is the ethnic oppression that they fight alongside their men. The other one is gender oppression. When these men who are your allies when it comes to fighting ethnic oppression, they turn around and they become your own oppressors. So you have this double relationship with your men when they are your allies and enemies at the same time. And obviously, the hardest job, the hardest fight is this internal battle when you have to believe that you're a human and your gender doesn't necessarily make you less of a human or less capable than other people around you. So these are the three fights that Kurdish women have been fighting throughout the history as well as today.
It's interesting that you brought up Rojava because I was actually going to say, when I look at the various pockets of communities that Kurds have been able to establish and maintain, so in Iraq, obviously now there's Rojava in northwest Syria, the societies that they preside over tend to be quite equal, right? Women do have a very important and elevated place. And dare I say, if you look across those 4 countries where there is a displaced or a stateless Kurdish population, you'll notice that those pockets of communities, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and even Iran, function well, right? They function particularly well. They seem a little bit more secular than the world that's around them, right? Than the society that governs around them. And so to me, as I was reading the book, I was actually very surprised because my impression was, A, that women are elevated just naturally by instinct, by culture, by your history, and that there's a sense of equality among people. And so to me, it translated that I wondered if you were talking or you were telling the story of a girl coming of age, after all, in Islamic Iran, right? In an Iran that had experienced its own revolution and was now Muslim. And so was some of this an attempt to conform to the rules and the norms that were around the Kurdish community, given the fact that the Kurdish community constantly feels as though it's being scrutinized? So I thought that with all of the pressure that this girl had, this was just an added layer of difficulty as she was trying to figure out who she was and how she was going to make meaning of her life. Something I want you to bring up, and I know we talked about it in email exchanges lightly, is this idea that Kurds are named with these very heavy names that carry a lot of history and a lot of meaning, and with it, as they grow up, a lot of expectation. So girls or boys, you sort of grow up thinking you've got to do some great thing, but then if you're a girl, you're also brought up thinking, well, you better learn to not aspire to much, be able to cook as she learns to do, as Layla learns to do. So is there some friction between I want to fly, I want to soar, I want to be part of our independence, and I have to stay home and make sure families are intact?
Absolutely, everything you mentioned is correct. So that's why I had siblings. I had Layla and Shia, who go through similar things, and they have somewhat of a similar childhood until the moment when they realize that their gender now somehow gives them different path that they have to tread. And so even Chia, who is a very good brother, and like you said, the light of her life, there are moments when he has blind spots on, when there are moments when he doesn't know what it's like for Layla to be a minority and also be a woman. And like you said, to actually live with all these contradictions, that on one hand, yes, you look around and say, you look at history, you look at the present situation of Kurdish women, and you see that you expect that with more ideas of secularism and a less religious community, there should be more freedom with women, whereas in reality, it's not there. And that was the reason I chose a sibling. I wanted to kind of create a compare and contrast between their experiences. But like you mentioned also, Layla is not just Kurdish. She grows under the Islamic Republic, which changes everything for her, not only for her gender, but also for her ethnicity. Yeah. So there were those things that she had to fight with Shia, and there were those things that she had to fight against Shia in order to achieve and grow. And
it's truly an amazing story of a girl growing into a woman and finding a way to have a voice and an objective, which was hard won, definitely difficult for her to achieve. Let's talk about the 40 million stateless Kurds that we know are on this globe. Tell us about your own early life and how old you were when you realized that you belong to a people that are systemically targeted, frankly, with the aim of extinction in 4 nations. So I know you kind of told us that you were older before you had this sense that you wanted to go back and learn about your history and your place in the world. But it's a tough history to unpack. At some point, you must have realized that you belong to a people that, that occupy spaces of land in 4 countries that generally don't want to let them thrive. And so that had to be a slow realization.
Right. Right, absolutely. I think even though I hadn't been educated in Kurdish history, or I mean also Kurdish literature, there were things that I could see firsthand. I could see from first grade how you grow up speaking a language, and then on first grade now you suddenly have to learn a new language, as well as learn literacy in that language, and how from age 7 you're already a step behind everyone else in the country who speaks the language and understand it. It was really easy and visible and tangible and even visceral to understand all sorts of oppression, like from the fact that I had to, from age 7, I had to start covering up my hair and my body, whereas all the boys around me, they could run around and play and put on dress according to the weather, not according to the custom. And I feel like the education I later received gave me the language to understand what I had personally experienced. There was a lot, like everyday examples of, you could see that your mother tongue is not the language of prosperity, is not the language of education. And what does that mean? And then obviously the Halabja massacre affected every single one of us when you realize that, oh my God, these people are targeted for extinction only and only because of ethnicity. And then there was this contradictory reaction. On one hand, you're told that you're alive, and you just being alive, you just breathing is an act of subversion, because there are all these forces that want you to not even breathe, right? So just be and just claim your identity, and that's a victory for you already in this world. And then there are the deeper and tougher questions of, what does it mean if I belong to people that repeatedly throughout the history have been targeted for extinction? What does that make me? Who am I? Where do I stand in this world? And how can I try to change that? And especially how that has helped me understand a lot of what I observed today, like the reason I can be so sympathetic to Black Lives Matter movement and so many other movements here is because I know what it's like to be oppressed and to be a minority. And so these are these double-edged swords. On one hand, going through experiencing all of this makes your life so much harder. There are many more obstacles to overcome. And at the same time, it makes you so much more sympathetic, so much more stronger, resilient.
And it gives you the ability, as you say, to have some empathy for other people who are facing similar sorts of bias for reasons that have nothing to do with their doing. It's just the impression that people have, right? Mm-hmm. It's the judgment that the world makes everywhere in every corner of the world on people who look different or sound different or think different or believe different. I wanted to, just for the benefit of the audience, remind people of some of the terms you just used. First, I think you were talking about the language that you learn turns out not to be the language that you go to school with. It's not the language of prosperity and getting ahead. I assume you learn Kurdish at home. And when you're about 6 or 7 years old, you go to first grade and it's an Iranian school. And so you learn Farsi, I assume. and Kurdish was not welcome at all, right? I mean, if I
Yeah.
pick up cues from your book, you could, if you had a friend at school who was Kurdish, speaking Kurdish would be something that would put you in danger.
Absolutely, yeah.
And Halabja, just so everyone remembers, was the atrocity that took place in Iraq years before Saddam was dismantled, right?
Right. So it was a 2-year genocidal campaign from 1986 to 1988, and its peak was March 16, 1988, when 5,000 people died in less than 5 minutes when their city of Halabja was gassed. And even though that was not being the first or the last act of genocide against the Kurds, it was the most heartbreaking and prominent one. And chapter 1 of my book kind of starts with that. But I wasn't only looking at how it affects you when you're physically erased. I was going to also look at what it means when you inherit the trauma. So for those who survive, parents who survive, and they have the next generation to take care of, what is it like when you have your entire life you've only been focused on surviving and staying alive? And how does that shape you as a parent? Did you ever learn how to love? Did you ever learn how to convey your love for your offspring? And then there's children who develop their own trauma throughout their life, but also they have inherited this sense that the world is a very unsafe place. You know, they're there to come for you. They're there to come and get you. They're there to kill you any day. And then you realize that this idea of killing is not just mass genocide. It's not just dropping bombs on your head. It's also what's commonly known as ethnocide, when you're alive, but they kill your identity, and they kill your culture, and so you're just a shell of a human. You walk around, you're alive, you breathe, you talk, but you're so empty inside. You're so disconnected to your grandparents. There's this cognitive dissonance between the present generation who are alive and don't know anything about their identity, and the previous generation who survived genocide, but they have a much stronger sense of identity. And now you may not even have a language in common to communicate with your parents and grandparents.
I'm glad you bring that up, that passage, because it is really, truly a memorable passage, and it does set up the book. It sets up the story, and it makes the reader understand that this is the story of how generations of being under scrutiny or under subjugation impact the family, right? The children. And as you get through the book and you start thinking about those children, you realize that they are the children of adults who one day were children and probably saw terrible things. So I just want to take you back to that passage for a second. You write it beautifully. You convey exactly how it was. There's tension, there's darkness, there are corners in the room where there's a crackling radio, and this news comes to your story through this crackling radio. And the child, Layla, the child who hears this story, begins to understand that she belongs to a people that are targeted. She spends the next few years really realizing, as you say, that her father and her mother are not prepared to focus on the home and focus on the children and bring them love, because obviously they've got their own identity crises that they're unpacking. They've got their own memories that they're trying to grapple with. They've got their own expectations that never came true because of their ethnicity that they're trying to parse through while still being parents and raising children. But then as you get through the book, you realize that when the father was a child, he went through something that's unforgivable and unforgettable, and certainly would impact a child in a way that would impact how he becomes an adult and how he parents. So I think it's important to note again that your book is the story of geopolitics, but it's told so personally in the impact of a family that it really brings home the struggle of the Kurdish people. I want you to comment on that. My next question has very much to do with this idea that this brother and sister, Chia and Layla, have never experienced the trauma or the physical bruises of this annihilation that goes on around them, but they sense it and they own it, and it comes to them through their emotional existence. So if you want to comment on just the impact of having a place in a world, in a family that's constantly struggled with survival, then I'll take you, and I think you know what the question is, so I'll take you into the next question. I want you to talk about Chia and Layla.
I just wanted to, in a way, writing that book and telling that story and telling it as fiction versus nonfiction. was my way of giving back to the world that had offered me so much through literary fiction set in different parts of the world. So when I read a novel that's set in Nigeria, that's set in China, set in Japan, not only I understand the history of that country, I also see how it could affect a group of people, right? And that means I won't forget their story, because now it's not just numbers, and it's not just what the invaders and the attackers decide that they do. I look at how it affected humans, and it makes me be them for a couple hours and see how I would respond in a situation like that. And you know, world that we live in that's filled with so much short-sightedness, where we struggle to see beyond our primary concerns. I think literary fiction can really help us not only understand other group of peoples, but really understand ourselves better. Because through literary fiction, I got to, this is my personal experience, and I can say that it's true for a lot of people, that first of all, you get to know yourself better through other people, because they're holding a mirror to you, to your reality. And you get to understand other groups of people better, people who don't look like you, who don't sound like you, who don't call God by the same name as you do. And then, like we talked about earlier, you open your heart to them. And to me, that's what love is about. It's not about being possessive and jealous. And love is about opening your heart to people who look and sound so different from you. And that's how you grow as a human. So not only you understand yourself and you understand other people, that's when you understand your connection and how we all affect each other and how we're all connected. It wouldn't take a pandemic for us to realize how what happens in one part of the world can affect everyone else into the world. Literary fiction is, in a sense, ahead of our time. So now that I had been able to expand my own heart and expand my own horizon by reading these books, I wanted to do something similar. And because Kurdish stories haven't been told much or haven't been given a platform, it's so hard to get a book published that is about Kurds, because everyone's primary reaction is, who are they? No one knows them. No one would pick up a book about a group that they haven't heard of, right? But by writing this story, it was just, I wanted to create this dialogue where when we read each other, because when we read each other, there won't be war, there won't be racism, there won't be ignorance, because you see yourself into them, and then you don't want to hurt or harm yourself.
Yeah. I want to take you back into the book to talk about the generations. So your book focuses on the coming of age story of a young girl. In the process, we learn what her parents' generation have gone through, which is excruciating, right? It's through them and through their friends. We understand the circumstances across 3 countries, Iraq, Iran, and Syria. And we understand that as adults, or as young adults, people endure some serious discrimination, wanton killing, just circumstances that are unimaginable if one doesn't experience them or read about them. And they're hard to read, but they're wonderful, because we understand that we have to question things. We have to, as a people, as a civilization, we have to start to really wonder why we take injustice as just simply there and it's okay because it's been there for generations. We really do, as a people, have to learn about the circumstances of other people. You know, it's not enough to just say 40 million people are stateless and that's the way it is. We should probably be thinking about why they're stateless, all of these. But there are a couple of spots in the book where you focus your lens on the older generation. In 2 spots in particular, it's the mothers. Right, it's two spots where the son is being taken away. In one case, he's being dragged away, and the mother steps in to help. So at this point, the older generation, the grandmother generation, is stepping in to help. And in another instance, the sons are being taken away, and they never make it back home. It's actually an excruciating story that takes place in, I believe, Iraq, right? And there again, the mother tries to step in, and you understand through these stories that there's the younger generation that's learning who they are. There's the middle generation that's spending all of their time and energy trying to make things better. And there's the older generation that probably realizes their time has passed. They're looking back and realizing, you know, here they are at the sunset of yet another cycle that isn't nearing an end. Can you enlighten for us how that older generation grapples with the story of being Kurd or the identity of being Kurd? Is it about just protecting their children, assuming that their children won't be able to make a change? Is it about infusing in them the stories of history so that they can make a change? How is it for the older generation?
Well, I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but from what I have observed and what I have witnessed, I find them to be the strongest of all. I find them to be the least self-absorbed group of people, because they had so much at stake. They learned really early on that if they want to survive and get through this, they have to get out of their shell and their concern and care about others. So they have a much stronger sense of community and collectiveness, and they have much less time spending navel gazing, right? So they are by far stronger. They have seen much more in life. They have been through, you know, the Great Hunger. They've been through genocide. They've been through war. They've been through displacement. Several of them have lived, like so many people of so many Kurds have lived across all these 4 countries, Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and Syria. When they have been displaced from one side, they have gone to their cousins on the other side that now border says they belong to a different country, but to them, they're just their cousins, right? So you see them having lived across all of these peoples and having taken their sense of you are part of us and we're not separate with them across the borders. And I feel like that sense of, I feel like there is a moment, not a moment really, but several moments in our lives when we have to make a very big decision about our lives. And that's, there is this group that we don't deny, they're there, they want to take advantage of your misery and your suffering, because they're either selling weapons to you know, expand the war, or they are corporations that the more miserable you are, the more money they make. So there's this group that are actively making life worse for other group of people because there's profit in them. There's this really, really large group of people who are so involved and obsessed and absorbed by what they call their bills and pills, that they don't really take the chance to get out of their own shell and their own little world and look at what's going on around them, just not to benefit others, but even to benefit themselves. So they get stuck in their small worlds and in their tunnel vision. There's this another small group of people, like it's like our best intellectuals and writers and artists and activists, that for them, their only concern is not what's immediate to them, but they're willing to fight for people they don't know. You know, they're, you know, activists who take to the streets and are against the Vietnam War. They are, you know, intellectuals like Judith Butler who question a lot of things about what lives we value, what lives we don't value. So there's a small group of people who are actively pushing towards not just being a voice for the voiceless, but really to eradicate voicelessness, to create. And then I guess we get to decide who we want to be. And most of us need to leave this complacent, large group of complacent people and get ourselves closer to people who are fighting actively to change life for everyone, to improve life for everyone. There are people who think collective humanity deserves better than this. We don't have to go through all this suffering that we cause and create in each other. And I feel like for that generation and for this grandparents' generation, they had much stronger sense of we're connected. We need to take care of each other. We need to be united.
Yes.
Than my generation that deals with identity crisis and has food. We have more food than our grandparents did, but we have a lot less sense of connecting with each other.
Well, but what you do have, and I'm going to bring you over to the politics of it all. What you do have more than the generations before is a voice, right? Digital technology and the ability of people to connect to resources, you know, that give them, that propound their voice is greater today than ever. And I agree with you. I think that the various movements around the world have created a sense of empathy, or at least created a sense for various populations that they should have some empathy for different people around the world. So I want to ask you if you think that there is a political solution that could be prompted by the collective voice of Kurds, aided by the voice of people around the globe who read books like yours or understand more and more because of the availability of information online, who begin to understand that there is an injustice happening here and there's frankly no good reason for it. You know, is there a group that's coming together to form a lobbying group of some sort that can maybe come to Washington or other important political centers? You know, I know Iraqis have formed political groups, Iranians have formed political groups, various people have found a way to bring their voices together and expand that voice. I wonder if today, with all the movements across the world, with this drive towards empathy, with the availability of digital technology, if Kurds think, this generation of younger Kurds think that they can have a voice and maybe an organized sort of appeal to the world, to think about the fact that 40 million people coagulated in one area should really maybe not be stateless.
Right. So several things. First of all, we certainly do have a voice and have political groups. We have really active, strong Kurdish women who are talking in really loud voices. They're very active in academia. We have a lot of academic Kurds across Western countries in Europe and North America. But there's a difference to me between being allowed to speak and actually being heard. My personal experience was in Iran. I had such a hard time speaking because I could be arrested, jailed, even executed for having a voice. When I entered Canada, I realized that no one is going to kill me or take me away for speaking, but is someone actually listening? So even in the Western world where there is technology and there is voice, there's a hierarchy of whose voice matters, whose voice we hear, whose stories we hear, which books get the buzz, and there's a lot of politics that recreate that sense of pushing you to the sides and not giving you the platform. And with all the information that is available out there, how much of the information are we transforming into knowledge? How much of that knowledge are we transforming into wisdom, into taking action for others? Those are things we need to think about. In terms of political lobbying, which has been going on for a very long time, because the world understands you not based on who you are, but based on the borders that have defined you as Iranian or Iraqi and Turkish. It's very hard for Kurds to, across these 4 countries, to work together. They each try to resolve the solution within their own border realities. And then the other thing is, Kurds really want justice and equality more than independence. Independence is really a means to a goal. The goal is that accept us as humans, as equals, as a group of humans with all the the flaws and the strengths of any other group of human. The reason I chose literature as my way of communicating this is I realized that politicians, for the most part, not for the exception of Angela Merkel in Germany or New Zealand's politicians who are female, most politicians, they're there for certain goals that they follow. And if protecting Kurds happens to be a side effect of a bigger goal, then it happens. But if it's not, they won't get out of their way to help you. Instead, you and I, as citizens, we can change and affect politicians' decision because they need our votes. So if I read your book and you read my book and I write to my representative and say, stop oppressing these people, or it is important for me when I vote for you that how you deal with this and that situation. That's how we as people can have this heart-to-heart resuscitation and help each other out. And that's why literature is unique and it's different, because it kind of bypasses the decision makers and the politician by connecting us, and then we can change things once we have awareness. It's important when we are casting our ballots, whose interest we have in mind. Can we think beyond our own limited interests? Can we have a global perspective when we are contacting our representatives and decide who we vote for?
Yeah. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. There's your call to action. Everyone who lives in a Western nation and has a vote, please make sure your representatives, wherever it is you are, understand that the Kurdish issue is an important issue. If we have time, I'm going to take you to another character. I'm going to ask you just to quickly take a look at another character that you develop in your book, sort of as a pair. She's the daughter of a mother, and they're exceptional, right? So it's Schiller. The character's name is Schiller. Her mother is from Iraq, right? No, her mother is from Syria.
Kobani.
Yes, her mother is from Syria, but she is currently a single mother who has quite a voice. She is set in her ways. Her confidence is unwavering, even though she's been through some difficult times. She's raising a daughter that is decidedly Kurd, unapologetically Kurd. And Schiller grows up to be just like her mother, you know, a ball of fire, and she's not willing to step down. She wants to make fun of everything that she finds offensive about you know, the society that she lives in, which happens to be Iran. She's motivated about change. She's motivated about having a voice, and she sort of, it seems to me like she represents something in your book. She probably, in the beginning at least, represents the antithesis of the person who turns out to be your heroine. But here's a mother and daughter, totally different from everything that we expect, struggling but still thriving on their own terms. So I want you to talk a little bit about Schiller, because she really is a resistance fighter at heart. She's not out in a battlefield, but she's resisting. And it sort of reminds me of the fact that uniquely around this world, female Kurdish fighters are a force to be reckoned with. Very few people around the world haven't now read a story about female Kurdish fighters really being on the leading edge of resistance and defending their people, defending their culture, defending their identity, and their land. So tell me a little bit about Schiller,
Sure.
and tell me if she's a resistance fighter in more ways than one.
She really is. She was actually my favorite character, and I wanted to write her story, but then I thought if I write her story with her being so exceptionally strong and so ideal, maybe I'm kind of doing an injustice to the rest of the society, because not everyone gets to have the mother that Schiller had. And let's talk about her mother. I've looked at and interviewed a lot of people who have gone through imprisonment and torture, which is not common in Iran. Our best minds, our bravest people, our strongest, our smartest people are behind the bars as we speak right now, and they're being tortured. So I wanted to look at torture and how it shapes women. From a lot of the research that I've done, it's impossible for people to not change after they're being physically tortured. It's just how much you change, whether or not you're broken, and how badly you're broken depends on how strongly you believe in what you're being tortured for. So I had Layla's father, Allah, and I had Schiller's mother, who both go through prison, both go through torture, but one of them comes out completely broken down and depressed and unable to heal himself. And here we have Schiller's mom, who is capable of healing. Not that she didn't hurt, not that she didn't go through too much, but she is capable of forgiving and letting go. And I wanted to have that force in the book, even though she's not the primary one. I also wanted to give Layla some sort of a mentor, because I didn't give her good parents. I needed to have her at least look up to Schiller's mom. Schiller herself is representative of the strongest aspect of Kurdish women. Layla is something in between. Layla is someone who goes through some sort of transformation. The flower Schiller, which is the cover of the book, is really the most beautiful representative of Kurdistan and Kurdish women for me, because these are flowers that are wild and they're rare, right? What they're called crown lilies here. They grow across the Kurdistan plateau. They don't care if people decided this border is Iraq, this border is Iran. They grow across the hills, and they come out in such vibrant colors. They're red, orange, yellow, and yet it's looking down. So there's a sense of like humbleness to this flower, and it has a crown, which is why it's called a crown lily. It's like they're the queens, the wild and strong and resilient queens of the Kurdish lands. So that's why she's named Schiller, and that's who really she is. She's rare, and she's resilient, and she's colorful, and she's vibrant, and she's loud, and she's strong. And in creating her, I wanted to represent one side of Kurdish women. And in creating Layla, I wanted to kind of give hope to other Kurdish women and say, I know what you're going through. I know it's really difficult, but there's hope. Maybe you're not Schiller, but maybe you can get as close to her as possible. And in creating Layla, Schiller, and Shia, I wanted to have three characters who have three different ways of dealing with geopolitical oppression. You know, Chia picks up his pen. He believes in the power of his pen. Layla wants a camera. She believes in arts, in filmmaking. And Schiller eventually picks up a weapon even before she actually ends up doing that. And just wanted to showcase those three different realities and really different ways that even the parents and the parents' generation deal with their geopolitical realities.
Amazing story. I'm glad I asked you that question because Schiller is really, she jumps out of the pages from the very beginning, and it makes sense that she was the story you wanted to tell, but of course you'd be ignoring, you know, the sort of more common journey that brings women out of their shell and into their motivated realities. It's really quite a lovely book. I cannot recommend it enough. It's an incredible journey through some painful moments, but it's written so artfully and so beautifully that you sort of you hang on for the next page or the next line, and you get through this beautiful book in the end, and you end up richer for the experience. So thank you, Ava.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And I just want to jump in because we have some questions coming in from our audience. So the first question, as a Kurdish woman and journalist, I am so proud of having Ava Homa, such a great novelist and a voice to tell our own stories. This book is worth reading from all over the world. My question is, what are Canadians' perspectives on Kurdish women that Ava can hear back from other people? What do they know about? And maybe you can also answer that question for Americans' perspective of Kurds and how our media is handling explaining the Kurdish story.
Thank you. Media hasn't done a very good job. They were in the 80s, they started talking about Kurds when the genocide happened in Iraq. And so when we were portrayed, and again in the 90s, shortly before the Iraq War, we were only shown as victims, as these people who have been gassed and killed and died. And there was nothing else to our story. We were nothing but victims. And then recently, ever since ISIS was emerged and then Kurdish women started fighting them, the world went through this shock that, hold on a second, there are Kurdish women out there who can have their own militia and fight back. And so they started portraying us again, but again with a limited perspective of girls with guns. They started fetishizing us, and they started presenting us as if we have just come out of nowhere. They didn't talk about the history of how these young women who are being so strong today, they're standing on the shoulder of giants. There were generations of women who paved the way for the women today to do this. They forgot to mention that they didn't just fight ISIS, that they also dismantled polygamy and child marriage and a lot of other forms of oppression within their own community, right? So we're either overlooked in international media, and that goes for both America and Canada. And when we are presented, then it's a one-dimensional story that is presented. That's in terms of the media. In terms of individuals, I have received so much heartwarming, lovely reactions from some of the best authors and critics in Canadian literature and American literature, as well as just some really lovely individuals, which takes me back to the point of why I think literature is more powerful in connecting us than necessarily lobbying, because it's through art and literature that we can see our humanity reflected back to us.
Thank you. Do you know if your book has been able to be shared with Kurds in Iran, Turkey, or Syria? And if so, can you compare how your book is being received in the US versus Iran versus the Kurdish community?
Right. So the book, the translation of my book into Kurdish Sorani was completed recently. The translator and publisher over there are in the process of designing the cover, which looks beautiful. I still have to wait to see how the book would be received in the society. I know that when I was writing the story, I was writing the story for my Western audience because Kurds know everything that I have mentioned in the book. There's nothing new for them in it that they don't know. Well, what was important for me was to see Kurdish women's reaction who read the book in English. I wanted them to feel heard and feel seen. And so it's been very rewarding when Kurdish women contact me and say, this was my story. I specifically related to this part, but for the most part, I feel it did a good job of reflecting our reality. And that's been very rewarding. And this book cannot be accessed in Iran unless through, underground channel because of the censorship over there. And so we'll have to see how Kurds will respond. So far, they have been very, very supportive to the English version, but I guess once it's translated, it will be available to more people, and then we'll see. I hope and pray that they feel I've done justice to this story, to their story.
You mentioned that people told you no one would be interested in a story about the Kurdish people. How did you get a publisher to care about this story?
It took me years and years of receiving rejection after rejection after rejection. And it was because people said, powerful story, powerful writing, sorry, it doesn't have a market. And that gave me the hope that maybe I can find someone who would be willing to invest in this book. And I was so lucky that I found, well, my agent who believes in diversity, because there are a lot of people who talk about diverse books, but they don't want to actually take action. Whereas Chris Kepner is someone who believed in it, and I didn't have a lot of hope. I said, Chris, this is not going to go anywhere, but he was persistent. He said that he knew people in the industry that actually, and with their heart and with their action, cared about diversity. And so he managed to put my manuscript in front of two amazing editors in HarperCollins and Abrams, and two women. There were these two women who had faith in my book and had faith in my writing and were willing to publish it. But that took several years.
Thank you. Somebody is asking, have you met Kurdish journalist Farzad Kamangar, and has he read your book?
I really wish he had read my book. So Farzad Kamangar was the inspiration for this story. He was a Kurdish teacher who was put in prison and he was tortured, but he would send out these letters from prison that moved millions of people. Like anyone who read his word or heard his voice about the writing that he sent out, smuggled out of prison, basically, was moved by him. And I was one of those many people who loved him and kept reading his words. But unfortunately, he was executed before my book came out. I have been in touch with his brother. But in writing, even though he was the inspiration for my book, I didn't want to write his autobiography. I wanted to be able to create a world that would represent a larger story and not his story or my story or someone's specific story. So I think of Farzad Kamangar as my teacher. I think of him as my teacher because he is the type of person who went through these atrocities and didn't lose his humanity. I wanted to know if this is possible. I wanted to know if someone can actually do it, because it's easy for me to sit here and talk about love and beauty, but it's extremely difficult, almost impossible, to be tortured and still talk about hope and humanity. And he did that. So in doing that, I consider him my teacher and the inspiration for this book. And it's amazing that the book came out on the 10th anniversary of his execution, which made me feel like this wasn't just a coincidence. Maybe it meant something. And I hope that him and people like him will continue to live through this and other books.
Thank you. This will be my final question. Are there organizations that you're working with or familiar with that are focused on supporting the Kurdish people and helping to restore their sovereignty?
So I have my own informal group where we focus on providing suicide prevention workshop. I don't have an organization. I haven't registered anything. I just work with other group of volunteers and we do what we can. There are a lot of Kurdish organizations out there that you can just find them at your fingertip by Googling them. I like to donate to the Kurdish Red Crescent when I can, and their organization is called Hiva Sura Kurdistan, which is exactly the Kurdish word for Red Crescent. So if you just Google Kurdish Red Crescent, they'll come up. They're doing a lot of great job making hospitals and providing healthcare and other amenities for people who are living in war-torn areas, especially in Syria.
Ava, thank you so much. Maryam and Kim, I'm going to turn this back over to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jessica. Those questions were great. And just so the audience knows, Farzad Kamangar makes it into your postscript. So I suggest everybody pick up the book, read it all the way through, and then read the postscript. Thank you again for joining us, Ava. Hi, Kim. Thank you for having us.
Maryam, just wonderful moderating again. And Ava, so very much. We are so appreciative of your time. I know it's been a crazy day for you, so we are so appreciative that you spent such a thoughtful discussion with us. So thank you both so very much. This was